And before I sentence you, I'd like to say a few words about your arrest record. What the hell?
Yo, the sign is real simple, B. It says wrap it up. Wrap that shit up, B.
I don't think that's a good idea.
Man, you want some too? You better wrap it up.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and it's time to start wrapping up 2020 as far as comic books go. And just last week, we had a three-way dance here on the channel, and some people, I think Peaches and Brie are a wonderful combination. I've got Perches and Brie here today. We're going to break down all the biggest news stories of 2020. And obviously here to talk with me about that is the man that brings all the numbers, the best interviews in comic book YouTube, El Percherino himself. Perch, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. Peaches and Brie. Oh my God.
Absolutely. Delicious.
All right. Fair enough.
And also the man so cool, they call him the Breen. Eric, how you doing?
Doing well.
So obviously we're going to have a retailer number cruncher perspective, but we're also going to have the fans perspective. And right here, you've got the schlub's perspective, the guy that needs some explaining for all this information, what it all means. And now before we get into all the biggest topics, I do want to say before we get into this, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, hit the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoy this. Give us a thumbs down if you don't. Let us know what your thoughts are, the biggest stories. Did we leave something out? You know, what do you think about the pandemic shutdown and everything that happened with it? And obviously, if you want some more three-way action with Breen, Perch, and myself here on the channel, you got to let us know. Now, we're not going to go in chronological order because you have to start with the biggest one first. It is the pandemic shutdown, something we've never really seen in the comic book industry before. Unprecedented. We didn't know exactly what was going to happen. Perch, it did not end up as bad as it could have been.
No, it didn't. I mean, we didn't know whether it was going to be a month off, 2 months off, 6 months off. We didn't know if the whole pencils down thing was going to cause, comics to be set back 6 to 12 months. It wasn't as bad as we thought. And for comic shops in particular, it did seem to remind people there are back issues out there and everything else. So it was an interesting moment in time. I think a year from now, we'll be able to really look back on it and see the business impact it did. But obviously that was the big story for comics. It really underscored how unprepared comics was for any kind of change, which is probably a story we're going to hit on a bunch this morning.
Absolutely. Breen, you've been reading comics since before I was born, and I'm not a young man. You've been in the game over 45 years. Had you seen anything like this?
No. Up to this point, there were, back in the day when there were the real two bad winters in the late 70s, it cut off distribution and made it really hard for places to get books, but nothing where the entire industry just shut down. It seemed like when it happened, the two main publishers took it differently. Marvel was almost like they folded like a bad poker hand almost immediately. Yeah. DC tried to push through, and then a few months later, it almost felt like nothing had happened. Marvel got their lead right back as soon as they started publishing books again. Any gains DC made were erased, but then it seemed like it went back to business as usual. And when it first happened, I did not foresee that it would get back to any type of normalcy in this year. But it did in a few months, which was in some ways kind of impressive.
Yeah, the staying power of the direct market and comic book fans has been impressive through all this. What's interesting, Perch, is we still don't know the full effects. Like you said, we're going to have to wait for a year probably to see exactly how everything's going to happen. We still had the government intervention as far as loans and things like that. But we did lose some shops, but we certainly didn't lose as many shops as we could have. And that's probably the best part about all this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the belief was that a lot of shops would close. I think in some cases, comic books did lend themselves, at least to some extent, through doing things through mail, doing things online. And in many cases, and this is going to be a very weird take, so keep in mind, in some cases, this was positive for a lot of shops that were resisting the urge or resisting going online, resisting selling to people remote. There are a large number of shops that just wouldn't do it, didn't want to do it, and this pushed them to do it. It pushed them to make that change, and that's one positive you can take out of all this, is it did force some shops to modernize, probably help stabilize their business a little bit. But it's a rough time, and I think we're going to see the real effects in a few months.
One of the things that we kind of predicted once this is all happening when we were talking about it, Perch, was we're going to see years worth of market evolution that probably needed to happen anyway, constricted into a very tight time frame. And so there was going to be some growing pains, but probably the best thing to come out of this, besides the perseverance of the direct market and not as many shops closing down as we kind of anticipated could happen, was we now have competition as far as distribution. DC opened up Lunar and UCS. Now it's just Lunar, I believe. UCS is no longer in the distribution game. They kind of went back to their core competencies. But now there's no longer the diamond monopoly. There's an option out there for other publishers. Nobody seems to have taken it yet. But that's probably, the best thing about this is now there's no longer that monopoly that was just that cloud that was hanging over the industry.
Yeah, I hope the industry uses it more. Like you said, I think that it's better to have more options. It's healthier for the industry, and it's really only going to be fully healthy if somebody beyond DC does it. Like that, we need more people to take advantage of this and then push that evolution onward. The evolution hasn't really occurred on the diamond side terribly. So comic shops have had to adapt. Lots of other people in the market have to adapt. Diamond has they've attempted to go back to their normal as quickly as they could. So they also still need to be pushed.
Brie, now I'm sure you remember this. The comeback, Diamonds, their comeback's going to be better than their setback. Doesn't feel like that was fully embraced by most people. Basically, the feedback was essentially UCS and Lunar, as far as the way that they were packaging the care put into the products when they were delivered was much greater than Diamond. Do you foresee that Diamond will take steps to maybe up their game and maybe equal what Lunar is doing as far as their distribution?
Well, I think they're going to have to, because I'm sure when this first happened, they thought, well, we're Diamond. This is going to fail. DC will come crawling back to us and we can go back to business as usual. Now, I will give Diamond credit for one thing. Over the years, they did a very good job of making sure that New Comic Book Day happened, because, as you like to point out, I've been around forever, and years past, before Diamond became a monopoly, there were a lot of days you'd go into the store on New Comic Day and see empty shelves, and you'd go, "What?" And they'd go, "Oh yeah, it's late. It's going to be tomorrow. It's going to be 2 days from now." We didn't get that with Diamond, but now, we've got with Lunar. We have 2 New Comic Book Days, and people seem to kind of gotten used to that, and they kind of like it. And Diamond will have to make some kind of adjustment, because they're no longer the only, they're no longer the only big fish in the small pond.
Mm-hmm. So hopefully that's kind of the big things that came out of the pandemic. Obviously, we could go on, we could do 30 minutes just on the pandemic shutdown, but we do have a few other topics to cover. I think this is something we kind of all probably saw coming for quite a while. It's been called for, but really one of the biggest early news stories that we got, before the pandemic, Breen, was Dan Didio's abrupt exit from DC Comics. He actually went into work. He was on the message boards. I guess he was called into a meeting, and he was out of DC. Were you surprised as a customer that Dan Didio was leaving DC after such a long time with the company?
Kind of, because if you look back to the last decade, all the things that he survived, the things that just drove fan bases crazy, with the stubborn refusal to admit that New 52 had failed, the continuous relaunching of his universe, hell, going back to Flashpoint, New 52, DCU, then Rebirth, and then the way it seemed like, at least in my perspective, that he sabotaged Rebirth because he didn't like that it succeeded for a longer period of time than New 52, and then he said hired Bendis, raised prices, and he survived all of that, and then one day, I said, boom, he's gone.
So first, if I could point it to a couple of things, I think one of his big mistakes was not only bringing Bendis in, but giving him so much control. At one point, he was like responsible for almost like 15% of all DC comics being produced in a month. And that wasn't when they were doing like 40 comics now. That was when the line was much bigger. Now, he wasn't writing them all, but he was overseeing a large portion as far as, you know, his control over DC. But the other one probably was Generation 5. So much change that wasn't really synergizing with what they were wanting to do with HBO Max, what they were wanting to do with Warner Brother movies, what they were wanting to do in the Arrowverse. And I felt like eventually enough was enough, and they needed somebody that was, you know, that was seeing DC Comics the way Warner Media were, where this isn't, you know,
Sure.
this isn't about the comic books. This is about the brand, you know?
Yeah, I think that was part of it. I think that at the end of the day, the contracts that he wrote, the deals he negotiated, were bad ones for Warner Media and for the company as a whole. I think Bendis got a very, very high paycheck. I think that forced other people to get a higher paycheck. It had a balloon effect of dramatically raising costs. You didn't see the subsequent profits or gains made from that. So at the end of the day, that's going to cut your neck more than anything. The fastest way is just, it becomes very hard about the numbers. And then kind of what you said, I mean, he was putting these plans together. He clearly wasn't working with other departments within Warner Media to say, hey, here's what I'm planning. Let's line it up with what you got, or why don't we adjust your thing to fit my thing? He was out on an island. He was doing something for DC alone and not thinking about the other parts of the company. And he was signing contracts with really high price tags to him. And that's a combination that's going to get you fired. And then I think he had a number of people within the company who were, I don't say stabbing in the back, because I don't think they were really in the back. They were in the front. But he like you said, he did things to Rebirth that really irritated several people, really irritated Johns. I think probably really irritated Snyder and others who were big names, who had put up numbers before. And it's like, hey, we're trying hard to make this company big. And then here's this guy who's bringing in these expensive people. They're not bringing in profit. And he's not talking to anybody else. And so I think that all those things definitely combined to put an end to him. And
that, you know, obviously that was followed by the pandemic. And then once it came up, Breen, DC just had, what do they call it, Bloody Monday or whatever. It felt like, you know, they released like a third of their staff as far as DC Comics go. Bob Harris was out the door. They promoted 2 new people to EIC. Eventually they settled on, was it Michelle Wells?
Michelle Wells was removed. Marie Javins was kept.
Marie Javins got the job. Michelle Wells was shown the door. Obviously, they have a new general manager. Editorial staff has been cut to the bone. We could have seen this one coming. You know, everybody was losing money at that point. You know, Disney, Warner Media, and HBO Max launch wasn't very good. And I don't know. Do you foresee that all these cuts in the staff and the editorial services, Breen, are really going to be felt by the readers coming into 2021?
Oh, no question. We're seeing it already with the mistakes and the printing that you talked about, the things that just wouldn't happen if there was any oversight. And we are seeing yet another complete sea change in how DC presents their comics to the readers. They're changing everything yet again. And I can see a lot of problems ahead, because they're doing it without veteran leadership in the editorial department, because most of it's been gutted, and the people in charge, like the one guy has been with the company less than 6 months, Cherry. And I know Marie Javins has experience, but there's a lot of places that you used to be able to go for answers internally that aren't there anymore. And that's eventually going to be felt within the pages.
Yeah, like, can you lose 100 years worth of experience or more, or how much they lost there? And think about the amount of corporate knowledge that walked out the door.
Yeah. No, it's sizable. And it's, I mean, and some of the processes, some of the ways the company worked were not right. To keep in mind, they weren't good ways of putting out comics, but the people who knew how to do those ways are now gone. The company doesn't have the understanding experience to realize those are bad ways. So they're going to continue to do these bad ways of producing comics, but without the people that were propping up those systems that were sort of making them work. And there's going to be a lot of stumbling just a lot. How people are getting solicited to work on titles and how you're managing the overall line. It's going to be clumsy. It's going to force him to rely very heavily on a couple small voices. So what you want to hope is, like, of the people left behind, Snyder obviously has a really big influence. You have to hope that he's got the company's best interest in heart, and he's going to work extra hard to help make it work. But you shouldn't rely on any small group of individuals. It should be more of a company-wide process, and that's not what they have right now.
So what's been interesting as far as DC, it feels like a lot of highs, a lot of lows. It felt like they rose to the challenge of the pandemic shutdown and certainly eclipsed anything that Marvel is doing. But they also had the lows. They just lost a lot of people. They're having issues as far as printing and errors and stuff like that. But Marvel was a little bit more low-key. We did see that the pencils down was kind of the big thing to come out of them out of the pandemic shutdown. But really the thing that stands out with Marvel to me this year, Perch, has been when they came out of the pandemic shutdown, they were like, well, just let's line up all these events.
Yeah.
Just roll them out. It's like event, and insanity.
It is. And unfortunately, I think you had people who were anxious to buy comics again. You've had, as we've talked about, some of the lower or the top titles are selling more as a result for whatever reason. People are anxious to get back in the shop, but you're seeing a slight boost. My concern here is this is teaching Marvel the lesson we don't want them to learn, which is, hey, more events. Look, we came out of this and we just rolled a glut of events, and our people tended to buy like 10% more. So clearly that is the answer. The answer is more events, less standalone titles, less kind of ongoing. Just move to kind of heavy events. And I know there's been people at Marvel who've already said the words, we should really think of events as a quarterly thing. And if you think about 4 big events a year, I mean, they're going to overlap each other. That just sounds like a nightmare to me. I don't know about Eric, but I don't want that.
But you get like a X-Men event, a Spider-Man event, an Avengers event, and something else.
Yeah, there's always going to be an event at this point somewhere in their lineup.
I don't know, Eric. I know you kind of signed off of Marvel a while back. Is that going to bring you back to the table?
Sure, it is.
Yikes.
Yeah, I think to purchase points, the big titles seem to be doing better post pandemic, and that may be because maybe readership's thinking, okay, with the way that happened, and who knows what's coming around the corner, the industry seems to be moving towards just top loading everything. And the smaller titles are going to fall by the wayside, either through sales or just through thinning the herd. So they're probably figuring, well, this might be all we have, so I'm going to go for these. And it's bad news for anybody that's been waiting for a lesser known character, especially at Marvel and hell in DC too. I think the days of taking chances on lesser known characters by giving them their own titles, unless they are something being propped up by something like a Future State or spinning out of an event, but those tend to have very short shelf lives anyway. So I think the future is more of the names, just I said more Bat, more Spider-Man, and less of everything else. And I guess that's the future.
Just throw an X on it; it'll work.
Absolutely. So what's been interesting about this, Brie, is Marvel and DC, when they came out of the pandemic, they cut down the lines. They still haven't got back to pre-pandemic numbers, and it doesn't sound like DC's definitely not going to do it. I don't think Marvel is either. And it's created some space for indie titles. We are seeing an independent comic renaissance as far as some of those top titles. Spawn is consistently like above 100,000 titles shipped or comics shipped right now. We saw huge debuts for Crossover, We Only Find When They're Dead, Department of Truth. We've seen the numbers grow for Something Is Killing the Children. I believe the numbers for Decorum also grew. We've seen a lot of these big, these independent comics with big, well-known creators from the big two jump in there, and they're shipping numbers that are eclipsing a lot of the big two, major titles. Are you? I'm in favor of an indie comic renaissance. I want more stuff. I want new characters.
I've noticed that a lot of the people you're talking about, they are big names from the big two that maybe see the writing on the wall and say, I'm going to sell things on, my creator owned on my name and get out ahead of what might be coming, because it seems like, especially at DC, bigger name creators seem to be being de-emphasized in favor of television writers, movie writers, whoever they can get, hoping that that'll work in synergy with the live action brand. And so I'm not surprised to see this happen. I am a little surprised by some of the numbers. Shocked to see Spawn get that big again, considering how many years it had leveled off. But that's probably good for people that are looking for that look for creators first. Those of us that are more fans of the big two's characters that we've grown up and grown older with, maybe not so much, but overall, I think it's probably a net gain for the industry.
Absolutely. Perch, is this something that you think this is a trend to watch in 2021? Are those top tier independent comics going to start eclipsing a lot of the big two titles?
Yeah, I think they will. I mean, I think two things that are happening. It has pushed people to the indies. And I think for the creators, if you live through Pencils Down, or you live through kind of wondering if you'd have a job after the Warner Media stuff and all that, I mean, you want control. At some point, you're going to want to not trust that somebody else has your best interest at heart. And it's going to be a very strong motivator to get your indie book out there and push it. And that's what we're seeing. And so I think you will see that real aggressive effort. I think we're going to need something other than Image for kind of, we're going to need a second Image. They're Boom, and there's these other companies as well that can do things, but the Image is going to get very crowded very quickly, especially if this continues over the years. You're just going to need some other companies to kind of come up and offer similar things to that. But yeah, I mean, it's a good thing. I think it's going to expand. I think it's good if creators are thinking like, how do I get my project into the hands of a customer? And I'm going to fight to do that. So it's been that's been very healthy for the year.
Obviously, not all of the news has been bad. We've had some good news. We've had some bad news. The pandemic shutdown, just the pandemic period, pretty much has controlled the news cycle for all of 2020, no matter where you're at. But I hope everyone enjoyed today's video with Peaches and Brie as we kind of run down the biggest news stories of 2020, the comic book industry.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Man, I got to get a logo for Peaches and Brie.
No, you don't. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Later, guys.